I mean, there's lots of chats. You choose which one you want to look at, so that we know where to.
I think if there will be a question, I will just post and then you can choose.
Yeah. Now we can see Karen in the live stream.
Yep. Is the audio all good? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, but not in the YouTube. There's lots of chats. You choose which one you want to look at, so that we know where to.
I think if there will be a question, I will just post and then you can choose.
Yeah. Now we can see Karen in the live stream.
Yep. Is the audio all good? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, but not in the YouTube. There's lots of chats. You choose which one you want to look at, so that we know where to.
I think if there will be a question, I will just post and then you can choose.
Yeah. Now we can see Karen in the live stream.
Yep. Is the audio all good? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, but not in the YouTube. There's a lot of chat. You choose which one you want to look at.
So should we start? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, but not in the YouTube. There's a lot of chat. You choose which one you want to look at.
So should we start? Can everyone hear me? I think it's the infinite loop now, right now. So is voice is an infinite loop, or how is it? Can you guys hear me at all? Anyone? Okay. Okay, then everybody can hear me? Yes. So welcome to the talk organized by DevOps Malmö. I should say I will be more happy if we see each other on site as we have done past 3 years. So the time has been a bit changing. So we are adopting to the new system, to a new way of doing things. Okay, then everybody can hear me? It's
Yes.
still going.
Welcome to the talk.
Okay. Sorry, that's my mistake. So it was in the underground going the YouTube, and I even didn't know about it. So sorry. Um, I wish we could have meet each other on Foo Café and then take the selfie as we have done it before. Yeah, but time has changed, so we will adapt to this new situation. Uh, so it is the first time we are going to do a remote meetup. So if you have any question, currently only available way of asking question is to ask it under the YouTube live stream. We will try to do our best to take your comments or questions from live video to the presenter to the presentation. Um, so if you haven't heard about DevOps Malmo, we are already 3 years presenting topics related to DevOps in area of Malmo. Mainly we have done it with Foo Café, and therefore a big thanks to Foo Café to organizing this meetup and past 3 years helping out to organize. So we have some social media contacts. In case if you want to do some presentation, you can check our GitHub link. There we have also guidelines, some topics that we are interested into. If you are more social media on Twitter, so we have a Twitter account where we post always if there is something happening. And the main events are hosted on meetup.com, and we have mailing group also in meetup.com. Sometimes we do promote some other conferences where you get free access. And that's because DevOps Malmo is collaborating with them. Good. So this is our social media links. If you want to follow any of these, feel free. Next is we are going to have another meetup soon coming. And it's going to be about, did you know about you could automate your DevOps performance? Date is yet not known, but soon in our social media or meetup.com, you will get more information. I think that's it about group and our social media, and feel free to ask about our group anything, and thanks Foo Café once again to organize this meetup. So that's and for my part. So now it's time for Johan to present about automation is hard and we are doing it wrong. So good luck, Johan. And that's it. So see you around.
Thank you. I will try to see if I can share my screen, and I assume that people will be loud if they are unable to hear me. So, hello, awesome people of Malmö. I'm sad that I couldn't be physically with you, so now this will be just my introduction into the Foo Café family, and then I hope I will be able to visit soon. And it is lovely that the setup I get is just previously we will talk about automating your DevOps performance. But first, I will talk about how we fail at automating everything. So I think this is a nice framing. I can see the chat on YouTube. So if you have anything that you want to address, then I will try to address it if it fits in my flow. I love being interrupted. But otherwise, please post it in the chat, and then I hope the awesome DevOps Malmö people, they will help keeping me accountable for addressing the questions at the end that I miss while we're talking. Excellent. So, Oscar, you might have two YouTube tabs open, but otherwise, I will do no more debugging. Now I will just be talking. I work at an awesome company called Efficode. In this slide, it says DevOps Transformation Lead. In many situations, I call myself DevOps Consultant. It's very dependent on who I talk to. Do I need to be technical? Do I need to talk to people in shirts? That's always the trade-off. So I've worked with a bunch of different companies around DevOps, automation, culture, everything. And today we're going to talk about automation. I also have to name drop. I made a book, and it's a bestseller. I sold the last 5 months 10 paperback copies in USA. So it's like a huge success. But never mind that. Automation is hard, and we're doing it wrong. And let's talk a bit about that. So first off, what is this DevOps thing? That's often the question. What is DevOps and where should we begin? One of the common definitions, or whatever we call it, is called CALMS. DevOps is about culture, fostering a culture of psychological safety, continuous experimentation and learning and improvement, all these kinds of things. It's about automation, removing toil. It's about lean product management, autonomous teams, all those kind of things. It's about measuring. Some say commitment to truth. I think it's more about being committed to reality. And it's about sharing, making sure that local optimizations are extrapolated across our organization and scaled that way. And if we have that, we say, okay, we want DevOps, we need columns, and nobody has any clue about how does this map over into anything really, because it's such abstract. So people start saying culture, that's very difficult and fluffy, so we're not going to start there. Measuring, that sounds like I will be kept accountable, so that's dangerous territory. We will not go there. Lean is boring. That's for manufacturing. Sharing is way not enterprisey enough for us. So we have to start with automation, right? That's how all DevOps journeys start. They start with automation. And the way we look at automation is then we just need an army of robots. We need a build server. We need to integrate to our Git repositories. We need to run different things, delivery, package management, automated launch, automate, automate, automate. But that's a kind of a narrow view of things when we just look at, we need to automate, so we just need a bunch of robots bumbling around all over the place. And if we look at the way that we're at the bottom of a stairwell, and at the top we have DevOps nirvana, the DevOps heaven. And our very first step is automation. Then how we're going to approach automation really is important, and it sets the scene for our DevOps transformation, right? For all our DevOps journeys, now we are phrased it as something that begins with automation. And the problem is that our organizations are wrong about automation. The way our organizations as a whole, whether we just look at software organizations or whether we look at a broader perspective of technology organizations increasingly having more software and those kind of things, we are wrong about automation at an organizational level. Organizations believe that automation is a luxury. Right? That's the assumption. It's something that we do when we have done our feature work. It's something that we add on, and that's just plain wrong. Automation is not a luxury. Automation is permission to play. It is the very basic for being professional software engineers is that we automate. So if we look at the State of DevOps report from the DORA Institute, and I think this is from the newest report from 2019, we can see that even those who are the lowest performing organizations, more than half of those automate things like the builds and their automated unit testing. So if we're not even there, we're not even on the map. We're just fumbling around. There's tons of different interesting things. We're seeing a high increase in the amount of people doing automated provisioning and deployment to testing environments, things like that. So even if we feel like automation is a luxury, if we're not automating, we're getting outrun by even the lowest of performers. And automation is already here. This is a screenshot of a GitHub pull request at React components on Buildo, and it's, I think, 2 years old or something like that now. What happens is that a robot notices that a dependency is out of date and submits a pull request to update that dependency. Another robot builds and integrates the change, see if it's successful. A third robot merges the change, and a fourth robot gives us a thumbs up on completion. Right? Completely automated workflow. And this happens and this works. And this is an open source project. So that's just motivated individuals, as we hear about in the Agile Manifesto. So imagine what we could do with motivated individuals that has a budget, because that should be our teams, right? So it's already here. The future is here. It's just not equally distributed yet. So we need to have the mindset that automation is not something that we sprinkle on afterwards. It needs to be something that happens as a part of our design. Automation is a first-class citizen. And then we hear the excuses. But the customer doesn't want any automation. But the customer shouldn't decide. The customer probably doesn't care about unit tests, or whether you do Scrum or attend dailies. The customer cares about the value you provide them. And if you're not automating, you're shortchanging your customers. Because by automating, by doing things like test-driven development, I claim that you will deliver more value more reliably at a cheaper cost. So the customer might not want the automation, but the customer for sure wants the outcomes that automation enable. Jan Bosch is excellent and sometimes somewhat controversial professor of software, and he has a blog post on the reasons that digitalization kills our company too. And we have, he sees things like limited software skills in their senior leadership. So we don't see why we should automate. We don't see why we should care about digitalization outside of the technology organization. And we're unable to for change from their most valuable customers. But the customers doesn't want your best. The customer wants their best. Same goes for investment firms, venture capital. So if you're unable to drive yourself to become better, then you will be outrun by those who can do that motivation. And I think it's Kevin Henney with the difficult name that says, what's good is a function of time, right? So even though we might be in a good place now, if we don't move forward, we will be outrun by those who are keep moving. So just to reiterate, automation is not a luxury. A second misconception at the organization level is that automation is complex. That's also wrong. The way we look at automation is that if we take a shovel and we upgrade that to like an excavator, we will be much more efficient at shoveling dirt. But the problems that we're trying to solve is more like we have this game of Jenga, and we want to move it along this bridge, but actually the bridge is very rickety, and the game of Jenga is not this isolated scenario, it's actually a game of Jenga that's being played while we're trying to move. Then it becomes a bit more difficult to say, how can we actually automate things around this? Or how can we reason about automation? And we have software architecture that's not based on blueprints. We can change software architecture. And in many cases, we can do so incrementally. The biggest problems happen when our architecture is in such a state that it's almost impossible to experiment with our software architecture. Then it becomes a negative reinforcing feedback loop where we are in a crappy situation that we can't experiment our way out because we are in a crappy situation. And then we end up needing to create platform 2.0 or doing big bang solutions rather than iterating and making things live. So we can change our software architecture. It's not set in stone. We also believe that testability is a key capability and it's a prime target for automation. But when we look at testability, we tend to forget about having an architecture that supports this testability. That's why many initiatives are that really can do stuff start with focusing on automated testing, because automating tests that really has tendrils out in architecture, infrastructure, all sorts of different environments. So our architecture can be, our software can be more or less testable. If we have access to the handles we need to automate testing, it will be easy to test. Otherwise, it will be hard. So automating simple things is simple. Automating complex things might be impossible while retaining sanity. And that's, you can quote me for that because I did. And the point is that if we're trying to solve complex problems, automating that will be complex. And that's not the fault of the automation. That's the fault of the complexity of the problem. So our organizations are wrong about automation. But the problem is we, the engineers, are also wrong about automation. And one of the ways we're wrong about automation is that we forget that automation is also software, and we should treat it as such. We have a tendency to say, well, I will be very disciplined around developing my software, but as soon as I see the ability to write some glue code in Bash, I will forget anything about being a professional software developer and just run a haywire. Version control matters. Version control of our automation is key. Ideally baseline together with the software that we're automating and treating it as a software product. Testing of our automation also matters. We forget that. And it becomes kind of meta. If we're testing our test automation, what are we actually testing? How can we test our pipelines and things like that? And it's not easy. It's just necessary. So we try to do all these kinds of things, but as soon as we can just hack something, we do that lovely. And we forget that test automation also need to be designed and reviewed. We need to continuously maintain our testing. The most common strategy for the order in which you run tests are in the order they were written, right? We write a test, we add it to our test suite, and we never look at it again. Unless we change something, then it fails, and we'll change the test such that we get the okay, right? And we need to work on our testing. We need to refactor our testing. We need to make sure that the capabilities that we have in our testing, that they work. We need to make sure that we don't overrun our tests. We need to make sure that keep our tests fast. And then we, of course, have a tendency to say, we want to automate all the things. It's always better to automate things. If we do things very rarely, we need to automate them to figure out, to remember how we did them. If we do them very often, we need to do it to save time. But we also forget what's the total cost of ownership of our tool. Now we have yet another thing that we need to maintain, right? And we always build the things ourselves, because that's easy. So we end up in the not invented here syndrome. We build stuff from scratch all the time because we believe it's simple, because our understanding of a problem is simple. There's a bias called what you see is all there is. So if I need a message queue, I'll look at a message queue and think, that's a lot of documentation and things I need to understand. All I need to do is have a REST API and I need to publish and subscribe. I can write that in a weekend. But I forget all the mental models, all the best practices that goes into all these kind of things. And now I just have yet another custom topic that I need to maintain, that I need to be an expert in. So it's also called the Ikea effect, and we love it more. It means we love it more if we made it. So that's also one of the reasons we have a hard time killing our darlings. Custom made build systems, all sorts of different things. Even though we can have followed instructions and getting the right result looking good, we will probably be more infatuated with the things that we just thought of ourselves. And that probably has to do with the mental models that we build and how our own mental models are more difficult for us to align with something else rather than just create stuff that fits our mental model. Which also means it's important to reflect on what it means to have a team mental model and making sure people are aligned with that. But that's a completely different discussion that I will let you talk about over beer another time. So our organizations think about automation wrong. We, the engineers, are wrong about automation. And we do automation initiatives wrong. And first up, our strategy sucks. Our general strategy is that our master plan is we automate some things and then we profit. But one of the interesting things they found in the State of DevOps research is that they call this the J curve because of a different drawing of it. But as people deploy automation, we go from being low to medium performance, take all this with some censorship. And that means that when we have removed one bottleneck, we will actually create a ton more work for testing and for change approval processes. So we will actually see an increase in the total amount of manual work being done, while we also have to maintain the complexity of our automation. And many companies stand there and say, okay, automation is not for us. We haven't gotten any value. But as we increase test and change approval automation, we will lower the amount of manual work we have to do. And if we're not aware of this peak, if we're not aware that we're not necessarily reducing the absolute amount of manual work, but we are rather looking at removing or minimizing a type of manual work that will enable other types of work to be the bottleneck, then we will have set ourselves up for failure. And there is no silver bullet, right? There is no like you can just automate this. Peter Drucker is an excellent, at least management thinker, and he has this saying, there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all, right? So the best automation step is to stop doing things. Don't automate it, stop doing it. This is boring, this isn't value add, we should automate it. No, we should stop doing it. But we need some code, we need some actionable items out of me, so you can run this silver bullet instead of non-value adding steps. So just put this in your pipeline and it will echo eliminating a wasteful step through automating with the silver bullet. And there's of course a link to the awesome automation here. So that was overall my very brief talk, apparently. I will be happy to discuss automation. If you have any questions, let's take them now. And otherwise, other than that, I've promised our marketing person that I wanted to put a little ad in for our awesome and free conference at the 23rd and 24th of March. It's free and awesome people come talk about awesome things. So you should check that out. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments or cat pictures, then please throw them in the chat. Thank you, Felix. Would I like to talk a little more about testability? Yes. Is there anything specific or more concrete? Like the step of not doing it. Yes, go on. So, Andrea, I will, if you have, Andrea is asking, would I like to talk a little bit about more testability? If you have something concrete you'd like me to address, then I'll do that. But while you consider that, I will address Felix, who says, do you have a simple way to calculate what to automate? So the very first, I'm looking weird because I'm just trying to get Windows right. We might need a mandatory XKCD automation chart. So the very simple way is that you, of course, refer XKCD that has created this chart. It's a fantastic webcomic if you're not unfamiliar with XKCD. And generally here, he has made a chart of how much time you can invest in automating in order to be more efficient over the next 5 years if you have a task that takes some time and you do it how often. So this is the simple way of calculating what to automate. But in general, I'd say 2 points I think is worth it. So of course it's a matter of making the trade-off between how much time am I spending doing this versus how much time do I need to invest in order to save this time. And that is a reasonably simple calculation, and we can refer to this this chart at least for a 5-year depreciation period. But this is a very cost down focused question, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we often in many improvements we forget that it's not necessarily only about reducing cost. It's also about enabling completely different way of working. So let's take the issue of deployability, deployment automation, right? So let's say that I have something, I'm working on a software product, and it takes me a day to deploy a new system from scratch. And one way of looking at that is that if I have 10 deployments a year, I will spend 10 days a year. So I could spend some time reducing that time to a half an hour, and then we can calculate whether that would be worth it or not. But if we look at it the other way, we can also say that having a one-day deployment is really being an obstruction in terms of how we can work, whether we can test, whether we can act quickly, whether we have an incentive or not to do fresh deployments. So rather than only looking at it from a cost down perspective, it's also very interesting to look at it. How would we work if we could do this? A classic example is that if I have to wait 2 weeks to get a virtual machine from IT, I will not be as incentivized to getting that machine, trying to spin something up and throw it away. And when I need stuff, I will order much more than I need because I know it takes a lot of time. So I think there is something interesting in thinking not only about how can we save money, how can we reduce risk, how can we reduce things, but there's also a lot of effort in figuring out what does it enable and how much of our time do we want to spend doing manual things. The Google Site Reliability Engineering book, they say they say that we have that they succeed in having at most between 30 and 50% of their time spent on toil. They say non-engineering challenging tasks, things like that. And I think that's important that we reduce our toil such that we can scale super linearly with the amount of team members. And we can't do that if we don't have a high amount of focus on automation. So that was a long rant on a very short question, Felix. I hope you feel that I at least somewhat answered your question, even though I derailed it completely. So Andrea asks, when you say testability on automation, do you have TDD or BDD in mind, or is it more over that? So I have no clue about, and then you say testability of automated tests. I'm not sure how you test automated tests. What is important is, or my point at least, is that we should test our automation. So if we have deployment automation, we should verify that our deployments look as we expect. If we have infrastructure provisioning like some Terraform or Chef or Puppet or whatever we use to provision our infrastructure, we should run our experiments and see that we end up in the concrete state. If we have and also that when we, so common scenario, we could have some templates and then we pass it some values and then our infrastructure is deployed based on how we substituted these values in our templates. But most organizations I have seen, at least, they don't have any tests. They don't have tests of their infrastructure deployment scripts, and those who have tests only test the happy paths. And so we forget to say, what if I give it an invalid IP address or an IP address that's outside of our designated range? How do we verify that the libraries we do to template our pipelines are consistent over time and things like that? But it is difficult and challenging. But I think we should at least stop and reflect on whether we could do a bit better, even if it's just the first cheap steps, because that will likely save us the time. Björn is asking, do you see any special challenges or pitfalls when automating tests in a microservice environment? So one challenge, at least, is that we might accidentally have decoupled a ton of different stuff by decomposing into microservices, and then we end up somehow coupling our microservices through the tests. And that might be a thing. Also, depending on the scale and complexity of your scenario, having a baseline, this is our state of normalcy, might not be interesting, or realistically saying that we have now we have a consistent version of our environment, because we also want to do things like pushing a new service to production and route some part of the traffic to that. If we have things like chaos engineering, like destroying our production environments. So I think that one of the difficulties in testing there is figuring out what are the right abstractions and interfaces and how can we keep those stable and test those in isolation, such that we don't have to spend too much time discussing end-to-end testing, because that is kind of contrary and to the microservice thinking, possibly. But at least I would be aware of coupling services together in tests that are otherwise decoupled. And I think we also have a tendency to do that even in ordinary or ordinary traditional software. Excellent. It doesn't look like there are any more questions. I don't know if of course the chat is also probably a bit delayed. So otherwise, I will say thank you so much for your time, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or through physical. Okay, excellent. We got another question. Let's see here. If we find ourselves in the wrong process of automation, basically hitting all the traps you've outlined here, such as working from R&D and up, are there any tips or precautions you can give to help? So I think in that case, it would probably be a good idea to take a step back and saying what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, or what are the pains, the concrete pains that we're trying to alleviate through these automation initiatives. And if there is any way that we can measure and radiate, visualize that progress. So let's say we want to automate creating the release notes. So rather than having someone walking around asking everyone, what did you put into the last release? We will do just for funsies, something that just outputs all the commit messages or Jira tickets that went into the last release. And that saves Y amount of hours each month. So we can make a business case and we can say, well, how do we then have an adoption strategy? Should we roll this out more? So I would focus very much on trying to be as concrete as possible in the outcomes and pains that we're addressing. And I know that can feel a bit dangerous. And then I would try to be as loud and as communicating as often as possible about progress and success in these things. So I think that would be my thoughts around that. I think that was it. I don't know, Karen or Albert or Michael or anyone wants to round things off.
Yes. If there is no more questions, we can probably say thank you, Johan, for presenting. And
you're very welcome.
Thanks all attendees. So we will have a next meetup soonish. So we don't have yet a timeline, but if any of you has a idea of presenting something, or any of your colleagues are open to do any presentation, feel free to talk to us. And yeah, I see a lot of people is thanking you in the chat. So amazing. Thanks everyone. And thanks Foo Café for hosting us. We have been doing this already 3 years. So the group is about to celebrate its 3rd year. So it's small baby is growing. So thanks everyone, and see you around.